Who was the earliest to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants? Aristotle was the first to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants. Aristotle was the earliest to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants. Aristotle was the earliest to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants. Aristotle was the earliest to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants. Aristotle was the earliest to attempt a more scientific basis for classification and use simple morphological characters to classify plants. On the basis of which characters Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. Simple morphological characters. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified simple morphological characters. Simple morphological characters on the basis of which characters Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. Simple morphological characters. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. On the basis of simple morphological characters, Aristotle classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animal. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animal. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animalia. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animalia. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animalia. Name of two kingdoms that were developed during lineage time: plant and animalia. Who proposed the five kingdom classification system? R. H. Whittaker proposed the five kingdom classification. R. H. Whittaker proposed the five kingdom classification system. R. H. Whittaker proposed the five kingdom classification system. R. H. Whittaker proposed the five kingdom classification system. R. H. Whittaker proposed the five kingdom classification system. Name of the kingdom defined by Whittaker: Monera, protista, fungi, plant, and animalia. Whittaker defined 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 Monera, protista, fungi, plant, and animalia. Sole members of kingdom Monera are bacteria. Bacteria are the sole members of kingdom Monera. 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 Most abundant microorganisms is bacteria. Bacteria is the most abundant microorganism. 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 Spherical shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of coccus. Spherical shaped bacteria are called 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 coccus. Rod-shaped bacteria are grouped under which category? Bacillus. Bacillus are rod-shaped bacteria. 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 Comma-shaped bacteria are Vibrio. 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 Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category of spiralum. Spiral-shaped bacteria are grouped under the category called spiralum. Compared to many other organisms, which group shows the most extensive metabolic diversity? Bacteria, when compared to many other organisms, shows the most extensive metabolic diversity. Bacteria, when compared to many other organisms, shows the most extensive metabolic diversity. Bacteria, when compared to many other organisms, shows the most extensive metabolic diversity. Bacteria, when compared to many other organisms, shows the most extensive metabolic diversity bacteria when compared to many other organisms. Shows the most extensive metabolic diversity bacteria when compared to many other organisms. Shows the most extensive metabolic diversity bacteria when compared to many other organisms. Shows the most extensive metabolic diversity. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in salty areas are known as halophytes. Archaebacteria that live in hot springs are known as thermoacidophils. Archaebacteria that live in hot springs are known as thermoacidophils. Archaebacteria that live in hot springs are known as thermoacidophils. Thermoacidophils are the archaebacteria that live in hot springs. Thermoacidophils are the archaebacteria that live in hot springs. Thermoacidophils are the archaebacteria that live in hot springs. Thermoacidophils are the archaebacteria that live in hot springs. Archaebacteria that live in marshy areas are known as methanogens. Archaebacteria that live in marshy areas are known as methanogens. Archaebacteria that live in marshy areas are known as methanogens. Archaebacteria that live in marshy areas are known as methanogens. Salty areas, okay. Methanogens are responsible for the production of methane or biogas. Methanogens are the responsible for the production of methane or biogas. Methanogens are the responsible for the production of methane or biogas. The eubacteria, also referred to as blue-green, the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae. Cyanobacteria is the eubacteria, which is also referred to as blue-green algae, which chlorophyll pigment is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the pigment which is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll A is the pigment which is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. So chlorophyll A is the pigment which is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll A is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll A is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll A is present in cyanobacteria for photosynthesis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. Some of the blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen in specialized cells called heterosis. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. The colonies of cyanobacteria are generally surrounded by gelatinous or mucilaginous sheet. Examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen are nostoc and anabena. Nostoc and anabena are the examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen. Nostoc and anabena are the examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen. Examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen and algae are nitrogen that can fix atmospheric nitrogen are nostoc and anabena. Nostoc and anabena are the examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen. Nostoc and anabena are the examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen, and nostoc and anabena are the examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen. Examples of blue-green algae that can fix atmospheric nitrogen are nostoc and anabena. Bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia are chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia are chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia are chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia are chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia are chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria are the bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia. Chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria are the bacteria that oxidize various inorganic substances such as nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia. The bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots is called heterotrophic bacteria. Heterotrophic bacteria are the bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots. Heterotrophic bacteria are bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots. The bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots is called heterotrophic bacteria. Heterotrophic bacteria are the bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots is called heterotrophic bacteria. The bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots is called heterotrophic bacteria. The bacteria that are used in making curd from milk, production of antibiotics, and fixing nitrogen in legume roots is called heterotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. Bacteria which play a great role in recycling nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and sulfur is chemosynthetic autotrophic bacteria. The cholera, typhoid, tetanus, citrus canker are well-known diseases caused by bacteria. Cholera, typhoid, tetanus, citrus canker are well-known diseases caused by bacteria. Cholera, typhoid, tetanus, citrus canker are well-known diseases caused by bacteria. Cholera, typhoid, tetanus, citrus canker are well-known diseases caused by bacteria. Cholera, typhoid, tetanus, citrus canker are well-known diseases caused by bacteria. Bacteria reproduces mainly by fission. 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 Under unfavorable conditions, bacteria reproduce spores. Under unfavorable conditions, bacteria produce spores. Under unfavorable condition, 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 bacteria produce spores. Organisms that completely lack a cell wall are called mycoplasma. Mycoplasma are the organisms that completely lack a cell wall. Organisms are the organisms that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Organism that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Organism that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Organisms that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Organisms that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Organisms that completely lack a cell wall is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cell known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Smallest living cells known and can survive without oxygen is mycoplasma. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Under which kingdom all single-celled eukaryotes are placed? Protista. Which group includes diatoms and golden algae desmids? Grassophytes. Grassophytes include diatoms and golden algae desmids. 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 The cell wall form two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box is known as diatoms. The cell walls form two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box is known as diatoms. The cell walls form two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box is known as diatoms. Diatoms have a cell wall which fit together as in a soap box. Diatoms have a cell wall which fit together which forms two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box. Diatoms forms two cell diatoms forms cell wall diatoms form cell wall forms. Diatoms have cell wall which forms two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box. Diatoms have cell wall which forms two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box. Diatoms have two thin overlapping shells which fit together as in a soap box. Diatoms are the chief producers in the ocean. 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 Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellate. Two flagella, one lies longitudinally and the other transversely in a furrow between the wall plates is present in dinoflagellates. Dinoflagellates example that undergo such example of dinoflagellates that undergo such rapid multiplication that they make the sea appear red tides is known as goniolax. Example of dinoflagellate that undergo such rapid multiplication that they make the sea appear red or red tide is known as goniolax. Example of dinoflagellate that undergo such rapid multiplication that they make the sea appear red or red tide is known as goniolax. Example of dinoflagellate that undergo such rapid multiplication that they make the sea appear red or red tide is known as goniolax. Example of dinoflagellate that makes that undergoes such rapid multiplication that they makes the sea appear red or red tide is known as goniolax. Examples of dinoflagellate that undergo such rapid multiplication that they make the sea appear red or red tide is known as goniolax. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Instead of a cell wall, euglenoids have a protein-rich layer called pellicle. Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Euglenoid. Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Euglenoid. Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Euglenoid. Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Euglenoid. Which protista group, when deprived of sunlight, behave like heterotrophs by predating on other smaller organisms? Euglenoids. Pigments of a dash are identical to those present in higher plants. Pigments of a euglenoids are identical to those present in a higher plant. Pigments of euglenoids are identical to those present in higher plant. Pigments of euglenoids are identical to those present in higher plant. Pigments of euglenoids are identical to those present in higher plant. Pigments of euglenoids are identical to those present in higher plant. Pigments of euglenoids are identical to those present in higher plants. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Under suitable conditions, slime molds form an aggregation called plasmodium. Which protista group is primitive relatives of animals? Protozoans are the primitive relatives of animals. Or which protista group is primitive relative to animals? Protozoans. Which protista group is primitive relative to animals? Protozoans. Which protista group is primitive relative to animals? Protozoans. Which protista group is primitive related to animals? Protozoans. Which protista group is primitive related to animals? Protozoans. Entamoeba in which type in which type of protozoan? Amoeboid protozoan. Entamoeba is 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 which type of protozoan? Amoeboid protozoan. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Amoeboid protozoans move and capture their prey by putting out pseudopodia. Example of flagellated protozoan is Trypanosoma. 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 Example of ciliated protozoan is paramecium. 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 Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Example of a sporozoan that is a malarial parasite is Plasmodium. Which of the unicellular fungi name the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer? Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Yeast is the unicellular fungi which is used to make bread and beer. Wheat rust causing fungi is known as Puccinia. 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 Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Examples of fungus which is a source of antibiotics, Penicillium. Example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics is Penicillium. The problem I'm having in speaking antibiotics is the spelling is written wrong. It's written antibiotics. Okay, so example of fungus which is a source of antibiotics is Penicillium. Fungus consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. Fungi bodies consist of long, slender, thread-like structures called hyphae. The network of hyphae is known as mycelium. 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 Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. Hyphae that are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasm are called cenocytic hyphae. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. The cell wall of fungi is composed of chitin and polysaccharide. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Fungi can live as symbionts in association with algae known as lichens. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plants is known as mycorrhizas. Mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhizas. Symbiotic association of fungus with roots of higher plant is known as mycorrhiza. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile or non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called plasmogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes are called plasmogamy. Fusion of two nuclei is called karyogamy. 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 In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, an intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, an intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, an intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, an intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In fungi, ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, an intervening dikaryotic stage in place and that is two nuclei per cell occurs. Such a condition is called dikaryon. In Phycomycetes, mycelium is aseptate and sinusotic. 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 Name the fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Rhizopus is a fungi which is also known as bread mold. Ascomycetes are commonly known as sac fungi. 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 Fungi that grows on dung are known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung are known as dung is known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung is known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung is known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung is known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung is known as coprophilous. Fungi that grows on dung is known as coprophilous. Mycelium in Ascomycetes is branched and septate. 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 Asexual spores of Ascomycetes are known as conidia. 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 Asexual spores of Ascomycetes are known as over here answer is not written. Asexual spores of Ascomycetes are known as okay. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. An example of Ascomycetes that is used extensively in biochemical and genetic work is called neurospora. Many members like morels and truffles are edibles and are considered delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edible and are considered as delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edibles and are considered as delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edibles and are considered as delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edible and are considered as delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edible and are considered as delicacies. Many members like morels and truffles are edible and are considered as delicacies. Biological classification. Okay, the basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. The basidious spores are exogenously produced on the basidium. Example of smut fungus is Ustilago. Ustilago is an example of smut fungus. 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 Example of rust fungus is Puccinia. 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 Deuteromacetus is commonly known as imperfect fungi. Deuteromacetus is commonly known as imperfective 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 fungi. Mycelium of Deuteromacetus is separate and branched. Mycelium of Deuteromacetus is septate 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 and branched. The Deuteromacetus reproduces only by asexual spores is known as conidia. The Deuteromacetus reproduces only by asexual spores and is known as conidia. The Deuteromacetus only reproduces by asexual spores and is known as conidia. The Deuteromacetus reproduces by asexual spores and is known as conidia. The Deuteromacetus reproduces by asexual spores and is known as conidia. Examples of Deuteromacetus is Alternaria colitotrichum. 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 Examples of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. And examples of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Examples of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of partially heterotrophic plant is bladderwort and Venus flytrap. Example of plant as a parasite is Cuscata. 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 A member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Members of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Members of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. Member of kingdom Animalia stored food reserves as glycogen and fat. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. In member of kingdom Animalia, mode of nutrition is holozoic. The name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. In the name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. In the name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. The name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. The name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. The name virus that means venom or poisonous fluid was given by Pasteur. Causal organisms of the mosaic disease of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic disease TMB. Causal organism of the tobacco diseases of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic virus TMB. Causal organism of the mosaic disease of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic virus TMB. Causal organism of the mosaic disease of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic virus TMB. Causal organism of the mosaic disease of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic virus TMB. Causal organism of the mosaic disease of tobacco is called tobacco mosaic virus TMB. Who demonstrated that the extract of infected plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plant? MWB generic. They demonstrated that the extract of the infected plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plant. MWB generic demonstrated that the extract of the infected plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plant. MWB generic demonstrated that the extract of the infected plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plant. MWB generic demonstrated that the extract of the infected plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plant. MWB generic demonstrated that extract of infection plant of tobacco could cause infection in healthy plants. Who who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. And W. M. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. M. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. M. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. M. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. M. Stanley, who showed that viruses could be crystallized and crystals consist largely of proteins. W. M. Stanley. In virus capsid is made up of small subunits known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. In virus capsid is made up of a small subunit known as capsomeres. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered a new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Who discovered new infectious agent that was smaller than viruses and caused potato spindle tuber disease? Theo Diener. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called as mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC), commonly called mad cow disease in cattle, is caused by prions. Analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC) is C.R. Jacob disease (CJD) in humans. Okay, analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC) is CJD or C.R. Jacob disease in humans. Analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC) is CJD or C.R. Jacob disease in humans. Okay, analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy (BSC) is C.R. Jacob disease in humans. Okay, analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy in BSC in humans is C.R. Jacob disease (CJD) in humans. Analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy in BSC in C.R. Jacob disease is C.R. Jacob disease (CJD) in humans. Analogous variant of bovine spongiform encephalopathy BSC is C.R. Jacob disease (CJD) in humans. Symbiotic associations, that is mutually useful associations between algae and fungus, is known as lichen. Symbiotic associations, that is mutually useful associations between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association, that is mutually useful associations between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association, that is mutually useful association between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association, that is mutually useful association between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association that is mutually useful association between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association, that is mutually useful association between algae and fungi, is known as lichen. Symbiotic association, that is mutually useful association between algae and fungi, is known as lichens. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. The algal component in lichens is known as phycobiont. Phycobiont is the algal component. Phycobiont is the algal component. Phycobiont is the algal component. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. The fungal component in lichen is known as mycobiome. Okay. A is cocky, B is bacilli और ठीक है, C is spirala or spiral shaped having flagella, and D is comma or vibrio shaped. Okay. Heterocyst mucilaginous sheath, ठीक है. Cell wall, cell membrane, cell wall, cell membrane, DNA. Euglena paramecium, Euglena paramecium. This is RNA, this is capsid, this is RNA, this is capsid, RNA, capsid, this is RNA, this is capsid. ठीक है.